Obligation, collateralization, and foreclosure. Objectives. The objectives of this chapter are to understand the implications of debt payment obligation, how properties become collateral to secure debt, what foreclosure is, as well as the two types of foreclosure. Collateralization and obligation. Securing debt payment. Let me ask you a question. What makes a financially successful institution or individual confident enough to lend, usually to a stranger, a significant amount of money for the purchase of real estate and have the firm expectation that the money will be paid back and with a profit? The reason is simple. In real estate, real property is collateral to monetary debt. In real estate financing, creditors have rights over the properties they finance. This means that the lender has the ability to gain control of subject real property and dispose of it in order to get paid. Obligation, collateralization, and foreclosure are the crux of real estate financing. It is vital to understand obligation, collateralization, and foreclosure. With this knowledge, the complete subject of short sales and foreclosure will be revealed logically and understandably. The concepts of obligation, collateralization, and foreclosure have existed for centuries. These principles are timeless and worth studying. Short sales are about real property that is collateral for a debt. The essence of real estate financing. The essence of real estate financing is the existence of an obligation to pay a debt and the pledge of collateral to guarantee that payment. There is a promise to pay and a penalty for not paying. Thus, there is obligation and collateralization. Obligation. Definition. In finances, an obligation is a legally binding responsibility to pay a debt to another person or entity. In this relationship, the person responsible to pay a debt is the obligor. The obligor pays. The person or entity to be paid is the obligee. The obligee gets paid. There are two types of obligation: involuntary obligation and voluntary obligation. Involuntary obligation. Definition. An involuntary obligation is a binding obligation imposed by the judicial system to enforce the payment of debt. The debtor-creditor relationship is created by judicial decree. This obligation is not necessarily initially associated with collateral. However, it is typically rapidly collateralized if the debtor owns real or personal property. A couple of examples are judgments and tax warrants. This tax warrant is a good example of an involuntary obligation. Voluntary obligation. A voluntary obligation is a contractual and binding obligation voluntarily accepted by all parties to enforce payment of debt. The debtor-creditor relationship is created by mutual agreement. In real estate, collateral is associated with the obligation from the beginning. In real estate financing, a voluntary obligation to pay debt is called a promissory note. Promissory notes. Definition. A promissory note is a legal instrument that contractually seals and records a voluntary obligation. In a promissory note, a debtor makes an unconditional written promise to pay to a creditor a certain amount of money in a specific time frame. It creates a contractual relationship between a debtor and a creditor. In this relationship, the debtor is the promissor and obligor. The debtor promised and therefore is obligated. The creditor is the promisee or obligee. The creditor was given a promise, so there is an obligation to the creditor. This is a good example of a well-drafted, commercially available promissory note. This image shows the same document, properly executed and legally binding. Here is the principal or face value of the debt, the location, and date the note was created, as well as the date on which the debt is due. Here the debtor promises by reciting "we jointly." Jointly means the promissors together, and severally. Severally means the promisors separately or individually. For example, if a couple divorces. Promise to pay. Promise means unconditional obligation. To the order of the creditor's name. This promise establishes the debtor as the promisor and the creditor as the promisee. This is the principal, $10,000. The terms of payment are interest of 12% per annum from December 3, 2002 until paid, with interest to be paid in a lump sum. Since this is real estate, the collateralization instrument is invoked. This note shall be secured by a trust deed. In this example, the debt is secured by a trust deed. It could have been secured by a mortgage. In addition, by description, reference is made to the collateral securing the debt. The date the debt is due is further stated. With their signatures, the debtors become legally bound to fulfill their obligation to the creditor. Foreclosure. Foreclosure is the extinguishing of the rights of an owner and other secured parties in order to satisfy a lien. The collateral is sold in order to pay an obligation. Most foreclosures are accomplished by trust deed execution or mortgage execution. Collateralization. Definition of encumbrance. An encumbrance is a binding legal claim attached to real estate. An encumbrance affects or limits the rights of an owner over a property. It does not necessarily have to do with money. Examples of encumbrances are rights of way, setbacks, height limitations, zoning ordinances, and CC&Rs. Definition of lien. A lien is a voluntary or involuntary encumbrance against the property for money. In a lien, the property is collateral to debt. Since the property is collateral, the creditor has a binding legal claim attached to the property. The claim must be paid when the property is sold. Examples of liens are judgments, mortgages, trust deeds, and taxes. Collateral. Definition. Collateral is a marketable real or personal property that a person commits either voluntarily or involuntarily as security for debt payment. Default triggers the sale or repossession of the collateral. In real estate, the sale of the collateral is called a foreclosure. The proceeds of the sale are used to pay for the debt. Types of liens. There are two types of liens, voluntary lien and involuntary lien. Involuntary lien. An involuntary lien is a lien on the property of a debtor resulting from a court decree. The owner has no choice. The lien is imposed on him by the judicial system. Examples of involuntary liens are child support, contractor liens, judgment liens, city and county tax liens. Voluntary lien. A voluntary lien is a lien in which an owner voluntarily pledges real property as debt security. The owner has a choice. He voluntarily elects to have a lien on the property. Examples of voluntary liens are mortgages and deeds of trust. Types of foreclosure. There are two types of foreclosure, judicial foreclosure and non-judicial foreclosure. Judicial foreclosure. A judicial foreclosure is a foreclosure by lawsuit. In a judicial foreclosure, the lender sues the homeowner for breach of contract. The homeowner becomes a defendant. Although it can take a long time, because default is easily proven, the court rules in favor of the lender. The property is sold by the sheriff in a sheriff's sale. Judicial foreclosures are subject to all kinds of legal complications. Most judicial foreclosures have redemption periods. These vary from state to state. Liens and most mortgages are foreclosed judicially. Power of sale. Although non-judicial foreclosures have been the norm for decades in many states, in a large portion of the country, judicial foreclosures are still prevalent. To comprehend how non-judicial foreclosures work, it is critical to understand the concept of power of sale. Power of sale is a mortgage or trust deed clause in which a debtor pre-authorizes the sale of the collateral in case of default. The creditor has a contractual right to sell the property if the obligation is not satisfied. Because of this, the property can be sold without any judicial action. In order to invoke the power of sale, the clause must be drafted in the collateralization instrument. Non-judicial foreclosure. Non-judicial foreclosure is the sale of a property under a power of sale clause. No judicial action is required. Unless poorly drafted, all trust deeds have power of sale. Few mortgages have a power of sale. Trustees or foreclosure attorneys execute non-judicial foreclosures. Non-judicial foreclosures are subject to very few legal complications. The majority of non-judicial foreclosures are final. Typically, there is no redemption. Trust deeds and mortgages with power of sale are foreclosed non-judicially. Review. Debt payment obligations are unconditional. Debt payment obligations are either voluntary or involuntary. In real estate, debt payment obligations are secured by collateral. Liens convert real estate into collateral. Foreclosure extinguishes the rights of the collateral's owner. Properties can be foreclosed judicially or non-judicially.